Welcome everybody to Spirituality Adventures. This is a non-judgmental place to explore spirituality, and we're so glad you're here. This is a viewer and listener supported podcast, so we greatly appreciate your support. If you're watching on YouTube, be sure and subscribe to my YouTube channel. Be sure and like, share, and subscribe to any of the social media content platforms that you're using. And then if you go to our website, spiritualityadventures.com, you can make a one-time donation, or with a monthly subscription, you'll gain access to our bonus content. We greatly appreciate it. Thank you for tuning in. Welcome everybody to Spirituality Adventures. So glad you joined us. We are privileged to have Greg Ealey, Pastor Greg Ealey, with us today. Thank you, Greg.
Thank you for having me.
I can't remember when we first met, but it's been
do you? Yeah.
Remind me.
I first met you when it was 2010.
Okay.
And we were doing the Convo of Hope for the first time.
Okay.
And I was introduced to you by Gina Hanna.
Oh, nice.
And we were discussing right out there in front of the field area where they were talking about plans of, putting things out. I think at that time it was a Swope Park. And your wife had experience with children's ministry. And so my wife and her started talking about that.
I remember that now.
Yeah.
How long had you been at Paseo Baptist at that point?
Not even a year yet. I got to Paseo in September 2009.
Okay.
And so that following 2010 summer is when we had that first Convo of Hope.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Good. So it's been over a decade.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, so Greg came to Kansas City, taking over one of the very famous historic black churches in Kansas City, Paseo Baptist Church.
Right.
Following one of
Charles Briscoe.
Yeah. Pastor Charles Briscoe, who had been there for over 50 years.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah. Well, he often over the course of his tenure, he was there. He pastored there about 37. He was associate pastor there. He senior pastored 37 years, and he came back and did 5 more years. And so, over the course of his tenure, he was there about 50 years.
Yeah. But when I moved here in 1990, I met Pastor Briscoe.
Oh yeah, he was the man then.
Yeah.
Pastor Briscoe was doing racial reconciliation discussions before it's popular. As a matter of fact, Colonial Ted Nissen, being the pastor of Colonial, that kind of really helped it grow. Him and Pastor Briscoe have a very great relationship with each other. So in 1968, when there were the riots because of the Martin Luther King assassination, there were riots in the streets in Kansas City, and people tell stories of tanks driving down the Paseo Boulevard. And so Pastor Briscoe and Ted Nissen connected and got the pastors to rally together to march the streets to bring peace to the streets. So Ted Nissen and Pastor Briscoe did that.
Oh, I didn't have that piece of information. Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Very good. Well, so let's start though. Where'd you grow up? Where were you born? Where'd you grow up?
Born and raised East Austin, Texas. At the time, is the inner city of Austin, Texas. It was for people in Kansas City, it would be your Troost, Prospect area. It was high crime, high drug rate, low education rate. In that area. But, the Lord blessed me to have parents that through the tough times stayed together. So I grew up, my father being very close, and my mom and dad they just celebrated 48 years of marriage this year.
Cool.
And so, where I grew up, it was the elementary school, Sims Elementary School, which was this elementary school in our neighborhood, was known for providing some of the, worst gangsters in the city, but God just kind of had I always feel like God had like an arc about being that as much involved in that aspect. I always had a center base. I had a ground zero, of a home base.
So you grew up in an urban African American urban core area in Austin. Is that
absolutely.
Right? Okay.
Yeah, the hood.
Yeah,
yeah. I grew up in the hood, and
what were your folks doing? What were their professions?
Well, my dad's majors in music initially, and so he was a band director. Eventually, got called a pastor about when I was 7 years old, and my mama went to secretary school. And so she did that and kind of bounced around from some jobs here and there, during that time frame. So,
Brothers and sisters?
I got one brother. He's 7 years younger than I am. So I have one younger brother.
Okay.
Who eventually, after the hills and the valleys, got a degree in engineering from Prairie View A&M University in the Houston area. And so, just me and him.
Okay.
Growing up in the home, it was tough, because my dad, when he got called to ministry, pastored the church. That was probably about 25 people,
wow.
at this peak.
Yeah.
And, and so he, we went out a lot of times. We went without, we went without electricity sometimes. We, sometimes we sleep at the church, and go home and shower and change clothes, get ready to go to school. But God always provided. My grandparents, seemed to always drop food by the house. And when it's time for school closed, grandma came, picked us up and took us shopping, But yeah, so it was a lot of rough times, but God just kept kind of showing his hand through the whole process for me. So yeah. Yeah, that's how I grew up there, and I don't know how far you want me to go.
Well, did you go through elementary, junior high, and high school in Austin?
I did. Okay. Yeah, and I went through. Is what I was about to talk about. Is that I was in elementary school around the time frame where busing to the idea behind providing a better education for these inner city youth. So they basically put us on buses and bussed us out to suburban schools, which didn't make sense to me because I stood on a bus stop in front of an elementary school on my way to an elementary school.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah. And when it got to elementary school, so that started about when I was in second grade.
Okay.
Being bussed out to Barton Hills Elementary School,
to a white school,
suburban Austin, Texas, and segregation just recreated itself because they started doing honors classes and gifted and talented and that kind of deal. So most of the kids who were on that bus ride out to Barton Hills did not have the capability of passing those tests, and so you had us getting off the bus and we all go down this hallway, where the regular classes were, and all the white kids' cars would drop them off and they all go down this hallway where the gifted and talented classes were. So you ended up having this segregated thing. Difference for me is that I did have a dad who was a band teacher, was a teacher in school. My grandmother was a teacher. And so for Christmas, I didn't get, Transformers and the He-Man and She-Ra dolls and that kind of stuff. I got flashcards and math books. And so by the time I got to kindergarten, I was on a first, second grade reading level. So when it was time, when they started doing the busing, I actually tested into the gifted and talented classes. So it was me and Felicia Shaw. She was the only other girl. Me and Felicia Shaw were the only black people in this all white hallway all day long.
Wow.
So I had to learn how to operate in that space so that the teachers didn't see me, just as another affirmative action project, but that I had to be there, that I deserved to be there. So I had to speak with articulation. I had to behave myself. I couldn't have an attitude. I was always talkative, so that was always an issue. But had to do my work better than everybody else just to prove I was there. And then I had to get on the bus and make sure I still had the language of the streets and fight my way all the way home. Because I was, an Oreo, white on the inside, black on the outside, a zebra, or, you think you're better than us because you're in those classes. And so I literally had to learn how to fight and hold my own. That's where I got my sense of humor from. I learned how to make people laugh, instead of fighting. But I had to live in those two worlds, and that was all the way until probably about the 11th grade.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Yep.
So did you went out of high school? You went to college.
Yeah.
Which college did you go to?
I went to Texas State in San Marcos, Texas. I wanted to go. I'm a Longhorn. I'm a Longhorn at heart.
Yeah.
Still, because that's where I grew up. But the opportunity presented itself for me to play college sports, and I wasn't quite tall enough to make the football team at Texas, but I was fast enough to make the team at Texas State.
Okay.
So I played football there.
Division II school?
No, Division I. Yeah, Texas State was Division I.
Okay.
Yeah, it was a small Division I at the time.
And you were, what position were you playing?
I did like kickoff return, kickoff in college mostly, and then I was a running back, cornerback. So those skill positions kind of things, and then track was my love. So that's actually why I went there, because of the opportunity to be prominent on a track team, and then I played football. Ended up leaving football and doing track full time because I got tired of getting my butt bone hurt.
Yeah. Watch your hands here on the table.
I speak with my hands. Yeah.
What about track? What were you running? Were you a sprinter?
Yeah.
Like you're running the 100, 200?
Yeah. I was a 4.37 40.
Wow.
Yeah. 100, 10.5, 21.9, 200. Ran the back leg on the 4x100 relay, 9.97 split. It was a 9.7 split.
Wow.
I ran
fast.
Yeah, sorry about that.
Yeah, no problem.
9.7 split. So yeah, I was a sprinter. So in football, most of the times it was like put Greg out on the edge.
Yeah.
Run the long haul, and we're gonna run the ball down the middle. I know.
Yeah.
Just get him down the field.
Cool stuff. So, at some point did you feel called to ministry?
I didn't.
How did that happen?
Well, that happened my last year in college, my senior year, and even kind of leading up to that a little bit.
Where your dad was a pastor?
My dad started pastoring when I was 7.
What kind of church was?
Like I said, it was a small church.
Baptist church? Or?
It was Baptist church, Weberville Road Baptist Church,
okay.
East Side, Austin, Texas. Still there. He's still pastoring there. And
wow.
He needed a musician. And so he taught me how to play. He was a major music, so I learned how to play the piano when I was 12 years old. I was his minister of music at 14. Started playing for him, and doing that, and and so then when I went off to college, he got me a job. A friend of his pastored the church down there, so he got me a job playing the piano for a church there in town. And I tell people that the playing the piano was an anchor that kept me from going too far, because we'd go out and party Friday night and Saturday night, and I did get caught up in the party scene, in college, and to party a little too much. And after my second year, I actually had to go back home. Did a year laying carpet with my Uncle George in the summer of Austin, Texas. And if you ever need any motivation to get back into school, lay carpet in Austin, Texas in the summer. Oh. And then in that summer, my mom came to me and she said, if you want to go back to school, I want to pay for you to get back in. So she took money out of her retirement. I said, Mom, I want to go. Got me back into school. And over the course of that time, met my wife. Yeah. So, funny thing is that I signed up for an anthropology class, and it was the wrong anthropology class. So I graduated with 3 extra credits, and the only thing I got out of that class was a wife. And met her there, and she had she's from Dr. Tony Evans' church. That's where she had come from. So she grew up with a morality, not necessarily having biblical knowledge as much as I did from being in Sunday school my whole life. But she, when I started dating her, a lot of the things I was doing, the people I was hanging around with, she kind of gave me an ultimatum. And I tell people, God made my wife so beautiful that I had one choice. So I started hanging around with her more. And she convinced me to join the gospel choir. And so joined the gospel choir, started changing some of my bad habits and focusing my attention on that. And we were at a gospel concert, and the guy was preaching, and he started, at the end of the message, started presenting the gospel. And, he starts putting his hands out and just nailing the nails in Jesus' hands. He said, "Tink, tink, can you hear the nails?" He's that, and I remember sitting there and feeling like God said, "This is what I did for you, and this is the life you give me," and I just started weeping. And my girlfriend, Selena, at the time, leaned over and she said, "You want me to walk down with you?" So I went down, rededicated my life, started teaching, Sunday school at the church and that kind of deal. And people would come to me and they'd say, you sound like a preacher. Your dad's a preacher. You're going to be a preacher. All those kind of things. And I just kept, because my whole life, my dad always said, whatever you do, don't be a preacher. Yeah. My whole life. From every meeting, from every Wednesday night, he come home, whatever you do, don't be a preacher. And so, I stopped. So I started fasting. Well, one week I was fasting. I was just praying. I was like, God, if you want to call me, you're going to have to call me, because I don't want to go, and I just prayed that prayer for a whole week and fasted. And at the end of that week, that following Sunday, I was going to church, playing the piano, and I got off the piano, and the organist was Sister Jones. And Sister Jones was one of those black mamas, Pentecostal mamas with the gold hat, matched the gold purse and the gold suit and the gold shoes, and, shout at the drop of a bucket. And she got off the organ and she starts walking toward me, and I just kind of sensed like, it was like this glow about her. Something was just strange. And so I'm trying to avoid her. I'm looking around at different places, and she comes up to her and she bear hugs me. And she said, God wants you to be a preacher, not because your dad's a preacher, not because you sound like a preacher, not because people think you're a preacher, but God wants you to preach because he's sending you. Now go. And I said, okay, I go, and of course I broke down, and the pastor at the time, Pastor Franklin, said, let's go call your dad. So we went into the office and I called my dad and I said, I just got my call to ministry. And he said, well, it couldn't happen to a better person, and I said, but my whole life, you've always said, don't be a preacher, don't be a preacher, what's the deal? And he said, I wanted God to call you, not me, and so started preaching then. That was 1999, November 1999, I preached my first sermon.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So because you wound up in Dallas.
Yeah.
Right.
So
your wife. So you met your future wife.
Yep.
In college.
I met my wife, and
she was your future wife.
Yeah.
And she was from Dallas.
Yeah.
And
Tony Evans was her pastor.
Okay.
Yeah. Tony Evans was a pastor. My father-in-law is his barber.
Okay.
And so
just for those who don't know, this is one of the really famous Black churches in America, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And most people know his daughter more than him now, Priscilla Shire. Oh, okay. Which, we're like, oh, Priscilla Shire's dad. Used to be the other way around, Tony Evans, but that's basically whatever level you see Priscilla Shire on, he was 10 times that, in the 90s and 2000s.
Yeah. So how did you wind up after college? You got married?
Yeah, so we got married that year, and her father wanted me to do my marriage counseling with Dr. Tony Evans. And so, we got married and stayed in Austin for, because I was an auditor. When I graduated, I started doing auditing for the state of Texas. I was an auditor at Texas Natural Resource Conservation Commission, basically. And I audited for them. And we would drive to Dallas on the weekends to do marriage counseling sessions with them. And in the marriage counseling sessions, I got my call to preach at that time too. And so he asked me, have I thought about Dallas Theological Seminary? And I told him no, I hadn't thought about it. And so me and my wife went and visited, and immediately we were like, this is where we're supposed to be. And so it was really one of those kind of Abraham, like, go to the place I'll show you kind of deals, because we packed up and moved to Dallas, and I didn't have a job and she didn't have a job. And so Dr. Evans, one of the things he asked me to do was to present a budget. And so I was like, shoot, I just graduated accounting degree,
Your personal budget?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. He wants to know where your money's going to go as a couple. And so I turned, I got the Excel worksheet, the numbers, follow the numbers, color coordinated and all that stuff. And he looked at it and he said, you did this? I said, yes, sir. He said, you need a job? I said, yes, sir, I do. And so he told me to go down to the Urban Alternative, the next week, and got hired on as an accountant for Dr. Evans's ministry. And my wife got a job as a teacher there, and ended up moving there and going to Dallas Theological Seminary.
So did you work on a Master of Divinity at Dallas?
They had the 2-year Master of Divinity, 3-year Master of Divinity, and a 4-year THM program. I did the THM, Masters in Theology.
Okay.
It was the worst of times and it was the best of times.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it was rough. I mean, it was a rough program, but you literally go through every passage of scripture in the Bible. You 4 semesters of Hebrew, 5 semesters of Greek, the whole drill. And I don't regret any of it. But yeah.
Who were some of your favorite professors while you were there?
Well, funny thing is, Chuck Swindoll became the president of the seminary my first semester.
Yeah, I remember that.
But one of my favorite was Mark Bailey. And Mark Bailey, most people know about the Swindalls and the Dr. Pentecost and I forget the other one, this real famous professor at Dallas that people know about, but
several from there.
Yeah,
actually.
Several. Yeah. But Mark Bailey became the president midway through because Swindoll was trying to plant a church and pastor, and be president of Dallas Seminary at the same time.
Right.
Eventually, after about 2 years, he ended up passing it. But Dr. Bailey would begin his class with prayer, and people would rush in just to hear him pray. Because of just how the eloquence of it, and it just seemed like that there was a moment that you just saw him and God talking, and so I really just enjoyed going there and listening to him pray before class started. So yeah, I would say that's probably one of my favorite.
Very cool. Yeah. So, and did you end up being you were on staff there as an accountant?
At Dr. Evans's ministry, yeah.
His ministry.
Yeah.
While you were going through seminary.
While I was going through seminary, yeah. And I did that probably.
Were you attending that church as well?
Yeah.
What was the name of that church?
Oak Cliff Bible Fellowship. Yeah, Oak Cliff Bible Fellowship's the name of the church. And so, but the ministry was 2 different entities, with the Urban Alternative kind of being an umbrella to the church. And so I worked for the ministry side for about 2 or 3 years. And, it's one of those deals, especially in the business aspect of ministry, where they pay you for 30 hours, but you work 50, and so it got to the point where I was doing more work than studying, leaving Greek class and going to deal with spreadsheets. It can get to be a lot. Right. And so after a while, I felt led that it was time for me to go, and I started doing some, pulpits fill for some of the smaller churches around town, until one of the guys I was on staff with at the ministry was actually a member of a traditional Baptist church in Dallas called St. John. And St. John was, it was the preparation ground for my assignment at Paseo. It was about 125-year-old church, well established, had a historical black pastor, that was very prominent in the city, and the person that was on staff who came in to pastor their church was from Kansas City, Leroy Armstrong, and had a chance to meet him. And God's like, this is the person I want you to follow. And so I left there and I did my internship with him because I wanted to do my internship at a church that I was most likely going to pastor. And so I did my.
So this Leroy Armstrong where was he from in Kansas City?
He was out of Wallace Hartsfield's church.
Okay.
Yeah. Metropolitan Baptist Church.
Right.
Yeah. So he was out of Hartsfield's church.
Okay.
And Hartsfield and Briscoe are contemporaries.
Yes.
Yeah. And so, we did that. I was there with him for about 4 years. And then about the 4th year, it was a fight from the very beginning, from start. And went to do my internship. He had a position open up for business manager. He's like, Greg, you qualify for this. First I told him no. And then my wife got pregnant. Then I said, is that job still open? And so I became the pastor of administration, at 26 years old, something like that. And I remember, I'm this 26-year-old kid in there and having 90-year-old women come in there, talking about, how'd you get such a prestigious job like this? Mm-hmm. And I said, ma'am, only by the grace of God, and she said, I remember her, she said, well, if you mess with the money, I'll kill you with my own hands. And I told her, ma'am, I'm more afraid of God than I am of you, But so after doing that for 4 years, they basically voted him out. It was ugly, with the whole thing, finding Smith & Wesson bullets in your mailbox and, nerdy mail and just the whole drill, having to have security for the business meetings. It was rough. They voted him out and we went and planted a church. I left with him. We went and planted a church. So I did a church plant for 2 years. And then after 2 years, Leroy came to me one day and said, hey, Greg, there's this church that's opened up in Kansas City because his family, he's here. His family was at church. And so I'm thinking in my head, wow, he's about to go back to Kansas City and leave me with this church plant. Mm-hmm. And he said, I told him I'm planting a church. I wasn't interested, and he said, so I sent him your name. And they sent the application in, and I'm thinking to myself, because after that whole church split thing, I was done. I had gotten a job as a chaplain. I had bought a home. I was doing a church plant. I had the weekends to myself. I got off at 5 o'clock. I was living a dream, and I was not trying to move. And of course, when you get comfortable, God just kind of nudges you. And went to the interview. I filled the application out and turned it in with no intent of taking the job in Kansas City, and came down for, they called me and said, you're one of our top 7 candidates. We want you to come and interview. So I went to that interview back in 2008 with the intent of talking them out of hiring me. I went in there and I had nothing to lose. So they sent me their bylaws. I went through the bylaws with, a red pen. This is not going to work. This is not going to work. The interview was 7 hours. 5 hours of them asking me questions and 2 hours of me asking them questions. And then they called me back and said, you're one of our top 3 candidates. And I brought my wife down. And we all met, and we were on the airplane on the way back. And my wife said, God is calling us to Kansas City, don't you? And I said, yeah, I think so. Wow. So ended up accepting that church in 2009, came here.
2009, Paseo Baptist Church.
Yeah.
Yeah, so when I came to Kansas City, of course I'd grown up here, but then went away to Baylor, and I was in Texas 8 years, Virginia for 3 years, moved back here in 1990, started church, and I remember just looking around the city and trying to find mentors that were 20, 30 years ahead of me, And so Pastor Briscoe was one of them. Ted Nissen was one of them.
Yeah.
Vernon Armitage was one of them.
Yeah.
I think even George Westlake was one of them.
Yep.
So
the father.
Yeah. So there were several different guys around town that I connected with really early in the early 90s. And I didn't know that story about
Briscoe and Ted.
Yeah, Ted Nissen and Briscoe, because my mother-in-law was really close friends with Linda Nissen. Had, I think, set her and Ted up on their first date.
Yeah.
And I was not familiar with their connection.
That's amazing.
Yeah, so
I'd have to tell that story when I get back.
Yeah.
I see her there. She's at church regularly.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, Linda Nissen.
Well, she would know me. So anyway. Yeah. So let's dive into the Black church in America.
Yeah, absolutely, let's do it.
For this audience who's going to be mostly white.
Yeah.
The people that are listening here. What's unique about the Black church in America, the historic Black church in America? Most of our white audience has probably maybe even never attended a historic Black church. Yeah. Or if they have, they've just popped in on a Martin Luther King Jr. service or something like that. It's interesting because since I haven't pastored for a few years now, a brick and mortar church. I still do pastor stuff.
Absolutely.
But I remember the first, I was at Macedonia Baptist, February of 2020, right before COVID hit. And so I went, and I was one of about 4 or 5 white people attending a black church with maybe over 1,000 black people in it. And I went through Black History Month.
In February.
As a white person in a black church, February 2020.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
And it was so powerful for me because I'd felt like I'd kind of gotten into my own world of bondage a little bit.
Yeah.
And the themes of darkness and bondage were so woven into, and freedom from bondage and slavery. From all that.
Right.
It was so woven into the perspective of the gospel.
Yeah.
And I thought about, wow, there's just so many things that stood out to me. I sang the Black National Anthem for the first time
Lift
in my
every voice
life.
And sing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I thought, God, what a powerful. I went home and almost tried to memorize those lines because they were so powerful.
Yeah.
At any rate, and I felt like I had known, I'd been connected with the African American church community for for more than a decade before that.
Yeah.
And it felt like I got to know it, but it really, I felt like I got to know it in a deeper way.
Yeah.
Having participated as a.
Yeah. Well, the black church is a very accepting church. For a white person stepping into that space, even, after, now, but the black church has been the cornerstone of the black community. The black church was where the civil rights movement started. It was Reverend Martin Luther King and Reverend Al Sharpton and Reverend Jesse Jackson and, all these people where the black church is where significance happens, which is a lot of reason why it's hard to transition to black church as a black pastor. Young black pastor, because you have people who found their significance in the black church, where you were boy and maybe the N-word all week long. When you got to the church, you were deacon and elder and pastor, Mr. and Sir. And so your value and your significance was created in the black church and the black church experience. And so when you try to transition to put people in other those positions, you feel like you're taking identity away from people. But there's a difference in worship. There's a worship that I like to call it the worship of the oppressed, songs of the oppressed. You sing from a different place where you've been cast down and put down and trodden on. When you sing in Amazing Grace, it sounds differently in a black church than Amazing Grace does in a white church, because you're singing from a groaning of places of having gone through, or not just saying Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound, but I've experienced that amazing grace, and I've heard the sound of God's voice when I couldn't hear anything else. There's a worship that's there that's celebratory, because I don't have to live for the pain that I have to deal with week to week by being called out of my name, but there's a better place for me. And so the experience of the black church has always been celebratory. The preaching, the singing, it's a celebration that comes from my African roots. And so that space is there. It's where kids learn how to read. It's where kids learn professionalism. It's where kids learn how to interact with the white community, how to behave yourself. And so the black church has been the pinnacle of the black community for years, and it still is. My fear, though, is now that at least the traditional black church, if it does not adjust, as most traditional churches do, if the black church, traditional church doesn't adjust, there's a fear of extinction for me, because there's a new generation of black kids, young adults, who are not associated as closely with the civil rights movement. And now with the rebirth of a civil rights movement, it's more founded in a Black Lives Matter organizational role than it is in a black church, where in a lot of cases, in conversations I have with people who are civil rights activists, community organizers, asking the question, where is the Black church? Why do you just show up when the cameras show up? That person doesn't speak for me. That person hasn't been in this pain. That person is using my pain to exploit for their own purposes. And so that aspect of it, I think, has to be adjusted, and leaders, like myself and John Brooks and others, hopefully provide an alternative to that perspective. But the Black church is, it's a pinnacle. It's where leadership began for the Black community.
Yeah. It's interesting. I'll do interviews with Black rappers in Kansas City. Black musicians, and even if their music in the hip hop world doesn't sound very Christian.
Yeah.
9 out of 10 times they started in the church.
Oh, most definitely.
Almost always.
Yeah.
They started
Aretha Franklin, Whitney Houston.
Yeah. But even your big rappers.
Oh yeah.
Mama took them to church, and they started in the church, choir or whatever it was. And
it was the big Texas rapper that's got international. I forget his name. Not Texas, Kansas City rapper.
Tech Nine.
Yeah, that's why I said Texas. I was known as Tech, but it's Tech. Yeah, Tech Nine. He'll begin in the church. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think, having grown up in a white Southern Baptist church in suburbs of Kansas City, growing up, I didn't understand the struggle. That Black people went through in America.
Yeah.
And I think because I didn't grow. I was a little bit too young to have the feeling of the civil rights movement,
right,
of the '60s. Like, I was born in '61, right?
Yeah, right.
And so I remember, I went to Park Hill High School, and there were about 3 Black families at Park Hill High School. Hoskins.
Yeah.
Turters,
right. You know who they were, right?
When we all did sports together.
Exactly.
And we got along great. And I didn't, from my experience with them, I wouldn't have known what their perspective was on issues of racism.
Yeah, and they were taught not to let you know that.
They didn't ever talked about it.
Yeah, they were taught that when you go into that space as a Black kid in a predominantly white space, you know your place and you know the conversation, and when you come back home, we'll talk about it.
If I saw any of them today, we'd hug and how you doing and all that kind of stuff. And so in my brain, there was no problem.
Right.
So I'm one of these white people who could have easily grown up and think, well, what's the problem?
What's racism?
We're past that.
Absolutely.
We're past that.
Yeah.
But once I started immersing myself in the Black community and the Black church community, I don't have, now I've got so many relationships in that world.
Yeah.
And I don't have one friend, Greg, that didn't grow up knowing racism firsthand.
Yeah, well,
as a Black person in America,
and you're looking at one who has also experienced racism firsthand. You're
educated. You're smart. You're a good athlete.
Yeah,
you were in white schools.
Yep.
You're in white seminary.
Yep.
You were in Black church.
Yep, Black church, Black neighborhood, Black experience.
You experience, and you talk about that a little bit. Because.
Yeah, no.
A lot of people want, hey, we've had a Black president. There's no problem. There's no white supremacy. It's all fine. What are you guys fussing about? All that kind of crap. Sorry for that.
True. But I had the unfortunate experience of actually witnessing that firsthand before a lot of my counterparts did, because I was the only Black kid in all white schools in the late 70s and 80s. Early 80s, whereas the Black people who got on that bus that I was talking about, that went down that Black hallway, they had one culture that was brought up in the white people, the teachers, the way they, treated them, whatever, was dismissive, because I'm getting back on this bus and going back to my neighborhood. And so they may have experienced it from a top-down perspective, whereas in my second grade classroom, I had kids making fun of the clothes I wear, calling me, names and treating me. I remember getting invited to a party. When I got to the party, certain people that there didn't want me to play in some of the same games other people played in, because I was the only black kid at this all white party. When I was in the seventh grade, I had a teacher use the word nigger in front of me, and I was in the seventh grade. I was in English class, and my English teacher at the time, she was explaining, we were going through a book, I believe, While the Caged Bird Sings, or some book that was based in early America, and she's explaining the context of the book, and she comes right by my desk, and she stands there, and she looks down at me, and she says, "This is when they call black people niggers." And all the whole classroom just turned and looked at me, and I remember I looked back up at her and I said, "I ain't no nigger." I didn't know how else to respond, and so that was, early on when I realized how different I was, being followed in grocery stores, having issues with
watching you because they thought you might steal something.
Of course. I had one guy kick me out and said I stink. He said, "You stink, you get out, you stink." Having that experience, being pulled over by police officers, harassed for what I thought was no reason. Maybe they felt like it was. One of the worst experiences I had, though, was after I was married, and it was actually back in 2006 when I was in Austin. I was living in Dallas, went to Austin to do a youth revival, and at the end of the week, the pastor, in the black church, they take the revivalists out to dinner at the end of the week. So we went to eat, and I was staying at a friend's house in Austin there. I get in my car, and I call my wife on the phone, and I'm driving. And in the rearview mirror, I see this car. It just seems like it's floating on air because it's driving so fast. And I remember saying, "Man, that car is going bam." And it hit me, and dropped the phone, car spinning, it came to a stop. First thing you do is you check your arms and your legs, make sure everything's still there. And then I looked out my window, and there's this black man, looked like he was probably about 6'3". He had dreadlocks in his head. He had on a camouflage. I remember like it was yesterday, he had a camouflage tank top on, and he had on red jeans. And he was laying flat, passed out on the concrete underneath the 18-wheeler that he had pinned in between. And my car just stopped right before I ran into the 18-wheeler itself. I was like angelic. And so I saw that, and I get nervous because the airbag smoke is all over the place. So I'm just trying to bang the car door open. And I bang the car door open, and I run out the car, and there's about 15 cops running at me with guns pointing me in the face saying, "Get down, get out, get out, get on the ground." So I throw my hands in the air and say, I didn't do anything. And then I get down. So I get down. Now, mind you, I just preached a youth revival. So I got on a green suit, and I put on a whole three-piece that day with the vest and everything, tie, dress shoes, the whole deal. And get on the ground. And so I get down, and the guy comes and puts his knee in my back, and everyone sees that picture of George Foreman. And I was like, yeah, George Floyd. And he put his knee in my back, and then he put my hands behind my back, and he put me in handcuffs. And I'm laying in the middle of I-35 in Travis County in Austin, Texas, on the ground. And the K9 unit comes over, and the dog's there, and he lets the dog go. And the dog bites my back. The dog bites my back, and he's just going at it. And I'm yelling, "I didn't do anything. Stop. I didn't do anything." And then finally they take the dog off, and I get up, and the officer comes up to me and says, "Sorry, we thought you were the other person." And I ended up having to get 7 stitches. And to this day, right now, every time I take my shirt off, I got the picture of a dog's bite from the scab, from the stitches in my back. And so when George Floyd murder happened, I told my story to Colonial because I wanted them to know that this is not a once in a lifetime incident. This is not something that haphazardly happens. This is something that for a while Black people have been having to experience on a regular basis. And I tell people, when they ask me about the experience, I say, I thank God it was a dog, because they could have shot me. And And so from that experience, early on, even now, driving at night, I have PTSD when cars pull up behind me, when cops pull up behind me still. I have to go through the check process. My insurance is up to date. All my lights are fixed. I got my seatbelt on. Like, there's nothing for me to be nervous about with this police behind me. And I still have to do that to this day because of that interaction. And that's just one of many.
Yeah. Honestly, I have no black friends I've been in a relationship with who can't tell me multiple stories of firsthand experience of racism in the country, for all over the country.
Yeah.
Not just in the South even.
Yeah. No.
So it's a deal.
Well, it's been like when I moved here to Kansas City, I moved north. And I stayed in I don't know if I can say the side of town or whatever.
Better me.
Yeah, I stayed in Clay County, moved into Clay County. And I lived in Clay Como. And in the first 6 months I was here, I was pulled over 6 times. One time I was pulled over because it said my license plate was crooked. Once I was pulled over because he said I looked suspicious because I had a hoodie on in the car.
Oh, no.
It got to the point where my wife would tell me to take different routes home, because of, being pulled over right here in Kansas City in 2010. I was driving one day down Paseo, about to park in my parking spot. Police officer pulls me over, says my car looks like a car they were looking for. And he begins to, ask me for my license plate and registration. And so in Texas, that's your driver's license and your insurance card. That's all where's your registration? I know what you're talking about. I never asked anybody ask me for anything other than that. He just kept yelling at me. I was like, what do you want? What do you want? And my wife's on the phone and she's like, just calm down. And I was like, but I don't know what he wants. And then so finally I just reached in the glove compartment and I just grabbed everything out of it and gave it to him. He was wanting the whole packet because he was trying to make sure I didn't steal the car. And then he says, and I'm looking at him like, dude, my name is on that sign right there. You're looking at my driver's license. My name is on that sign right there.
The church sign.
And then as he walks off, he hands me my license plate and says, I should have got you for not having your seatbelt on. And I was like, I'm parked. This is my parking. The black church, the pastor has a parking space. I'm in my parking space. He pulls up behind me. That was right after I got into Kansas City. So it's South. It's Midwest, at least for me. I don't know if it follows me, but I've experienced it in a number of places.
Yeah, you're not alone. I can say that. So let's. I'm trying to think how. So what's interesting? You came here to a historic black church.
Yep.
You pastored there for several years.
8 years.
Then you transitioned over to basically historic suburban white church, Colonial Presbyterian Church.
Right.
And you've been on staff there now for
5 years to the date, almost.
5 years.
Yeah,
so
this past weekend.
You've lived in the South.
Yeah.
You've lived in the black church.
Yeah.
You have now pastored for 5 years in
a white church.
Basically a white suburban church. All of these churches, I think, would probably be more evangelical, conservative in terms of their Bible theology.
Yep.
But what's interesting to me is like I've been hanging, I've always had great relationships with all the churches in the city. I would have been my history had been more in the evangelical community. But some of my progressive pastor friends, in my opinion, have gotten some of the social justice issues right.
Yeah.
More so than
a white church,
my own
evangelical group.
Background white evangelical churches. So we've got this progressive church. We could even talk here in Kansas City, but this is true across America.
Across America, yeah.
We've got our historic black churches, and you've experienced both.
Yeah.
And yet you've never pastored like in a progressive Christian church, but
no, not per se.
But you've got lots of relationships that way because you find those people partnering with you in issues of racism, civil rights issues, racism, those kind of things.
Yeah, well, the white suburban church would almost consider the Black Baptist Church progressive because of the heavy lean towards the social justice aspect of it. So in that perspective, it's progressive. In a lot of cases, even though I consider myself conservative, but there are some things that I feel like should be done that people would consider progressive to me, or to them. And
like what?
Like healthcare.
Yay! Yay!
Like wealth, like assets, like economic issues, like single moms and job opportunity, wealth disparity, education disparity. I mean, you go down the list, and a lot of times, I've had conversations with very conservative people that they just get an education. There's a school, they just get an education. That's what they need. And then the school's there, and they're not in school and they're not behaving. That's their fault. The education is provided for them, and I want to say, okay, well, enroll your kid in that school.
Yeah.
If it's education, it's education. So I've seen where the conservative Black church can be viewed as a progressive church.
I think that's a good good analysis there, because I grew up white, evangelical, pro-life, and when Reagan hit the scene, the pro-life Republicans really took over that pro-life platform, right?
Right.
So I was kind of like one of these one issue kind of people. But the longer I studied the issues of justice in Scripture, the longer I looked at and dove into all of these kind of issues, the more and more and more I think people begin to not know what I was, because
absolutely
I'd be preaching some things where I probably sounded very Democrat, and other times when I sounded Republican, but I wasn't trying to be political so much as just biblical.
Yeah.
And if you're biblical, it takes you to some places that make you look very, very.
You could be accused of having
a socialist.
Of teaching critical race theory.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But what you're trying to do is fulfill. I mean, Jesus picked up on the themes of justice.
Absolutely.
At Matthew 25 and on and on and on and on. He picked that prophetic banner up, and to me, the Black church in America has picked that banner up as well.
Yeah, we had to.
Yeah, you had to.
Yeah.
And so I think there's still so much education that needs to go on from a biblical perspective for Christians and for white Christians in America. That
absolutely.
That and I think if we could learn to listen to what the Black theologians have to say, the whole church would be in a better place.
Absolutely. And understanding, and Dr. Evans speaks about this in his book, Oneness Embrace, which is another great book, where he says the Black church has wrapped its identity in social justice, and the white church has wrapped its identity in the flag. Neither one of them are right. And that's kind of where you have the extreme, in the sense of there is this, sometimes it could be that progressive anti-America feel. That's not what the heart is, but it can feel that way. And then it also can be this anti-justice feel. It may not be in the heart, but it feels that way because of the strong stance on things. And both of them, both extremes hurt everybody, but we have to be truthful about things, like the prison, the preschool to prison, pipeline, and the war on drugs, and people always talking to me. The problem with the Black community is not the white people. Is the problem with the Black community is the lack of fathers. And I always ask, one of the illustrations that was given to me at a race and equity conference was, if you go to a lake and you find a dead fish, say something's wrong with that fish. The next day you go to that same lake and you find another dead fish. You say, you know what, these two fish have something wrong with them. If you go back and all the fish are dead, at some point you got to say something's wrong with this lake, right? So I always ask, did all the black fathers get up one day and say, you know what? I'm done with this whole fathering thing. I'm just going to leave my home. And so all of a sudden, fatherlessness in the black community is an issue because all the fathers decided we wasn't going to be fathers, or is something wrong with the lake? And if you look back into it, you got to at least bring some attention to what happened when, and I won't go into that, but, when the cocaine hit the scene, and it was a slap on the wrist for the white community. It was cracked up in black neighborhoods. And what was given 3 years here was given a 5-year minimum to life, and all of a sudden now you have all these people where this was just a misdemeanor, this is a felony, and now you have them get out of jail and try to apply for jobs, and they can't get a job because they have a felony on their record. They can't provide for their families, and so in a lot of cases they end up back in jail, and you don't have fathers in the places. And then you say those fathers need to go home and be with their kids. Say, yeah, but we send a whole generation to jail, put felonies on their records. Now we're trying to tell them to become fathers. Let's just acknowledge the fact that we had something to do with this. And I think that lack of acknowledging the part the church had to do with that is what hurts the black community and creates separation.
Yeah. So many issues, right? I mean, you think about the school systems, and the discrepancy in the quality of education.
Absolutely.
How many black kids graduate from high school who can't read?
Absolutely. Yeah.
And what's going on there?
Yeah.
In the discrepancy.
Absolutely.
Richard Nixon, is on tape. Making marijuana a Schedule I drug as a political strategy to put Latinos and blacks in prison so they can't vote.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
That's documented.
Well, and that's why
it's documented.
That's why in the conservative church there's push against the removal, the expungement of records so that people can get driver's license, and these things are hard pressed because I helped sponsor a voter registration drive a few years ago, and the question was asked me, why was I doing that? And I said, because I want people to vote. Right. Me sponsoring a voter registration drive somehow had this sense like I was trying to push some liberal agenda or something. Right. And that kind of hard pressed extremism, I think, is what continues to create separation.
Yeah. There's just, oh my goodness, there's so many issues, and my concern, maybe it's a fear, is that in the last 6 years, the white evangelical church has become maybe even more blind in America to issues of racism than they have been historically. There's always been a blindness.
Absolutely.
And I can confess to that because of the way I grew up. And I saw, my dad was from Wichita, Kansas. And he never bumped into somebody that wasn't an equal.
Right.
So I wasn't taught racism in the home, but when I realized how I grew up without a black perspective, and like I said, even in my high school, I had black friends, but they never talked about what they really went through behind the scenes.
Right.
So I would say that even coming out of seminary, white evangelical college, white evangelical seminary, white evangelical churches, I had a huge blindness to the racial issues, even though in my own heart I wouldn't have thought I was a racist, or I wouldn't have thought I had participated in any way in the problem. And I probably would have bought into some of these things. Why don't they go to work?
Right.
Why don't they do this? Why don't they do that? What I mean? These little simple
fixes,
as though there isn't any kind of systemic injustice built into the system.
One of the hardest to deal with is we just need the gospel.
Right.
And we just need the gospel. We need all this other stuff is distractions, dealing with these social justice issues. All of those are distractions. We just need to give people the gospel. But people fail to realize that the gospel was used to make really good slaves. In America,
yeah.
And in the production of the slave Bible. You've heard of the slave Bible, and there's certain sections of the Bible being taken out, like Exodus, anything that deals with being freed for any reason. And so the gospel was always preached. We adapted it to our situation. But it is dismissive when people say we just need the gospel, because then it seems to take away the fact that we've always had the gospel. So what happened? And that there is some responsibility that America has to take in the role that it's played in these disparities. And we can't just, say these are distractions.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I appreciate your heart for the ministry, for the gospel, for social justice.
Yes, sir.
I appreciate the way you've tried to, well, not just tried, but you've served our city even in many ways, and you've tried to help push these conversations into the churches, into the pastors.
Not easy.
And, even in your own church now at Colonial. Certainly, it's interesting. The COVID hit about the same time as the George Floyd thing.
Yeah, it was in the election year. It was the perfect storm.
Yeah, and so it seems like it just dialed up the issues. With such an intensity.
Yeah. Well, and one good thing about the situation the church that I'm in now at Colonial, back in 2018, our lead pastor, Pastor Jim, asked me to preach a message in light of the 50th anniversary of the assassination of Martin Luther King. And I preached a message entitled, He Had a Dream. My passage of scripture was John 17, where Jesus said, I pray that they are one as we are one. And the he who had a dream that I was speaking of was Jesus. He had the dream first. Martin Luther King just picked up the baton and ran with it. And so from that message, one of the quotes I used in that message is Dr. King saying, it's okay to tell a man to pull himself up by his own bootstraps, but it's cruel to tell a bootless man to pull himself up by his own bootstraps. And so had a group of people come to me who said we wanted to learn more about this. Long story short, over the course of several years, we now have a ministry called Kingdom Oneness, where we have catalyst teams in prayer, in community development, and leadership, where we do classes and partner with other Black churches to create spaces for our church Cologne, had that conversation, and hopefully, we had invited John Perkins in to speak to our group, and he said, you guys are a prototype of what could be as far as helping the white suburban evangelical church have a space to have this conversation. And so that's been a blessing to see God use that ministry to help us move the needle forward.
That's cool. That's good. What's your website?
At Colonial.
Or are you personally?
I don't have a website itself. Okay. You can find me on Facebook.
Okay.
You can find me on Facebook. You can find me on Twitter. Greg
Ealey.
Greg _Ealey. Greg Ealey. Is my Twitter account. Greg Ealey. Yeah. I'm on Instagram. I'm not a big social media person, so I have it. So I don't tweet or IG, as much as others.
I try, but
I just be honest with you, sometimes it can be a distraction. You know what I mean? I don't have any problem with it, and I enjoy it, and I can do it. But a lot of times I still rather have a conversation.
For people that are tuned in, what are some of the key ministries in Kansas City that you would really encourage people to learn about and educate, where they could get in and help be part of the solution to racism instead of the part of the problem?
Absolutely.
And what are there 2 or 3 of those that you might say, hey, check this out.
Absolutely. One specifically that I actually help lead is Unite KC. Unite KC is a organization that was developed by Dayton Moore who, after George Floyd got up and called Jimmy Dodd from Pastor's Herb and said, we got to do something about this. Got a bunch of leaders around the table, began the discussion, and the Unite KC came to be as an organization seeking to do one good thing towards racial reconciliation, racial healing in Kansas City specifically. And we operate off of 10 different domains. You know, I won't go through them all. You can find it on unitekc.org. But I help lead the church domain. There's a sports domain. There's a real estate domain. There's a nonprofit domain. So there's a space for you to plug in and find out how you can help do one good thing to help us move the racial reconciliation conversation ahead. You know, also a part of Pray KC, which we've decided to partner together as a family of people across races. Our board is Hispanic, white, black.
What's the name of this one?
Pray KC.
Pray KC.
Yeah, Pray KC. And
praykc.org?
Yeah, praykc.org. And actually, this coming Friday night, we will be in KCK, and you can find more information about it on the website. We'll be in KCK.
Probably won't come. That'll be over.
That would be over then.
Out.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. Well, this coming Friday, we'll be doing a prayer gathering specifically around students and teachers in our inner city schools. You know, so Pray KC is another one. But yeah, those are the two that I'm kind of really focusing my attention in on right now. And then, you know, if you want to connect with Colonial and find out more about Kingdom Oneness and what we're doing as a church to help the suburban church have the race conversation.
What's the website there?
colonialkc.org. You know, you can also send me an email directly, GEALEY at colonialkc.org. You can also find that email address on the website.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Well, be sure and tell your wife I said hello.
I will.
And, how old are your kids now? I'm trying to remember.
My oldest kid is in college.
Wow.
I know, right? When you saw them, they were 4 and 7.
Oh my gosh.
When you met them.
That's crazy.
And now they're 16 and 19. My youngest son will be 17 Friday. Yeah, and he's a junior at Liberty North playing baseball. So
wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah, we getting old, Fred.
I know. I hear you.
Yeah.
Well, excellent. Well, thank you so much for joining us on Spirituality Adventures and sharing your story. And
thanks for having me.
Your heart and all that you have done for Kansas City as well.
Yes, sir.
You're brother in Christ. I appreciate you so much.
I want to give a shout out to my staff, SKC Stay Ready. They know what I mean by that.
Okay. All right. Excellent. Well, thanks everybody for tuning in to Spirituality Adventures. We're glad that you are joining in with us. We'll see you next time. This concludes today's episode. Thanks for tuning in and listening. Remember, if you're watching on YouTube, subscribe to my YouTube channel. Remember to like, share, or subscribe to the social media platform that you're using. And then go to our website, spiritualityadventures.com, and make a one-time donation, or you can subscribe monthly and receive our special bonus content. Thanks so much.